They say absolute power corrupts absolutely, but what they don't tell you is that imaginary power corrupts even faster. That became crystal clear the morning Karen Whitfield, self-appointed Empress of Pine Ridge Estates, decided to have me arrested on my own ranch. I should have seen it coming after months of watching her transform from busybody, neighbor into a full-blown tyrant with delusions of authority. What I didn't expect was the sound of helicopter, blades cutting through the morning air, followed by the sight of 3 sheriff's vehicles racing down my private road like they were responding to an armed standoff. I was feeding my horses when I spotted her. Karen Whitfield stood at my locked gate like Napoleon surveying a battlefield. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, wearing a power suit that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." She pointed dramatically at my property as the deputies approached, her voice carrying across the pasture even from 200 yards away. The lead deputy looked seasoned, maybe 20 years on the force. His 2 partners flanked him, hands resting on their duty belts. Karen marched behind them like a prosecutor leading a conviction parade. "Sir," the lead deputy called out as they reached my fence line, "we've received reports of illegal occupation and livestock violations on this property. Are you the owner?" I could see Karen practically vibrating with excitement behind him. Her face twisted into that satisfied smirk she wore whenever she thought she'd won. She'd been building to this moment for months, and now her grand finale was about to play out. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. I flipped it open so the badge caught the sunlight. "Special Agent in Charge Marcus Williams, FBI," I said calmly. "Retired last year." The deputy's entire demeanor shifted like someone had flipped a switch. His shoulders straightened and he took a step back. "Agent Williams," he said, clearly recognizing the name. "Sir, I apologize. We were told this was a squatter situation." Karen's triumphant expression crumbled like a house of cards. Her mouth fell open and she blinked rapidly as if her brain was buffering. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground. "Let me back up and tell you how we got here, how I ended up with a small army of law. Enforcement on my land and the HOA, president trying to have me evicted from property I'd owned for 2 years. After 30 years with the Bureau, I retired to this 80-acre ranch, specifically because it offered something you can't put a price on: freedom. The land had been zoned agricultural since 1938, decades before Karen's precious subdivision even existed. I wanted space for my horses, room to breathe, and most importantly, no homeowner association telling me what color I could paint my barn. What I got was Karen Whitfield. It started 3 days after I moved in. I found an envelope taped to my front door, official looking with the Pine Ridge Estates letterhead. "Dear property owner," it began, "your land has been found in multiple violations of community standards." The list was impressive. Unauthorized fence materials, my century-old split-rail fence, excessive outbuildings, my historic 1920s barn, and maintaining commercial livestock in a residential zone, my 4 rescue horses. I actually laughed out loud. Then I walked over to Karen's house that evening with the letter in hand. She answered the door wearing a blazer and pearls, like she was hosting a charity gala, not greeting a neighbor. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "I was wondering when you'd stop by." "Ms. Whitfield," I replied, keeping my tone polite, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of your HOA." She tilted her head like I just told her the earth was flat. "All properties in this area fall under our governance," she said, each word carefully enunciated. "We maintain community standards for everyone's benefit." I handed her a copy of my deed and zoning documents. "My land predates your subdivision by 50 years. Agricultural zoning. You have no authority here." She barely glanced at the paperwork. "We'll see about that," she said, and shut the door in my face. That was the last time she pretended to be reasonable. Over the next month, Karen launched what I can only describe as a surveillance campaign. I'd catch her at my fence line with binoculars, photographing my vehicles like she was documenting evidence for a federal case. She started sending violation notices weekly. Improper landscaping for my wildflower meadow, noise violations for my rooster's morning crow, unsightly storage for my hay bales. Each letter was typed in official-looking font with legal sounding. language that meant absolutely nothing. The morning I found her actually on my property with a measuring tape was when I realized we'd crossed into full-blown insanity. She stood near my chicken coop, stretching the tape between fence posts like a crime scene investigator. "You're trespassing," I called from my porch. "These structures violate setback requirements." She snapped without looking up. "County code requires 200 feet from residential boundaries." "County code says 50 feet for agricultural structures," I replied. "I've got 300. You're on private property without permission." She straightened up, clutching that measuring tape like a weapon. "I'm conducting official HOA business. This entire area falls under our jurisdiction." "No, it doesn't. Leave now, or I'll have you removed." She gathered her equipment with exaggerated dignity, muttering something about escalating this to the appropriate authorities. I figured she meant the HOA board. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was repairing a water line when I saw someone climbing over my locked gate. Karen hit the ground running, manila folder clutched to her chest like sacred scripture. "Mr. Williams," she panted, marching across my pasture in high heels, "I have here a legal eviction notice requiring you to vacate this property within 24 hours. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took the papers. It was a masterpiece of legal gibberish, HOA bylaws, that didn't apply to non-members mixed with county codes she'd completely misinterpreted. Half the citations were for violations that didn't exist. "This isn't enforceable, Karen," I said. "You can't evict someone from land they legally own. I am the duly elected president of Pine Ridge Estates," she declared, puffing up like an angry peacock. "You are trespassing on HOA property. You're trespassing on my property again. I'm not leaving until you comply with this order," she said, pulling out her phone. "And I'm calling the sheriff to remove you. Go ahead." She actually smirked as she dialed 911. I stood there in amazement as she painted me as a dangerous squatter who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood and threatening residents. She gave my address, called me potentially armed and dangerous, and added in a trembling voice, "Please hurry, I fear for my safety." Which brings us back to the helicopter and the small army of deputies. Now standing in my driveway, Karen's fantasy was colliding, headfirst with reality. The lead deputy approached me with a completely different attitude, now that he knew who I was. "Agent Williams," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. We've actually met before, the Brennan kidnapping case about 5 years ago." I remembered him. Good cop, solid instincts. "Sergeant Rodriguez," I said, shaking his hand. "Hell of a way to reconnect." He turned to Karen, who looked like she was watching her world collapse in slow motion. "Ma'am, based on the documentation here, you're the one trespassing. This is private land, and you've been warned multiple times to stay off it." "This property belongs to the HOA expansion project," Karen sputtered. "I have authorization." I pulled out my phone and showed Rodriguez everything. The deed, zoning maps, survey markers, and a folder full of Karen's harassment letters. "She's been at this for months," I said. "Verbal warnings, written warnings, even a cease and desist from my attorney." Rodriguez studied the documents, then looked at his partners. They both nodded. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "did you climb a locked gate to access this property?" "I have administrative authority," she cried, the panic creeping into her voice. "No, you don't. Filing a false police report is a felony. Claiming a property owner is a squatter. When you know they're not is a serious offense." Karen looked like a deer in headlights. "The HOA bylaws clearly state HO bylaws don't apply to non-members." Rodriguez cut her off. He turned to me. "Agent Williams, would you like to press charges?" I thought about it. About the months of harassment, the invasion of my privacy, the waste of police resources. "Yes," I said. "And I'll be filing for a restraining order." Rodriguez nodded. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "You can't be serious," Karen shrieked. "I know Sheriff Davidson personally. Sheriff Davidson, who worked joint task forces with Agent Williams for 15 years? Rodriguez replied, producing handcuffs. "That Sheriff Davidson?" Karen's face went through about 6 different shades of pale as the cuffs clicked into place. Word travels fast in a small town. By dinner time, half the county had heard about Karen Whitfield being arrested for trespassing on the property of a retired FBI agent. The next HOA meeting broke attendance records. I was invited as a guest speaker on property, rights and legal boundaries. Karen sat in the back row, out on bail looking like she'd aged 10 years in a week. When residents called for her resignation, she stood up defiantly. "I was protecting our property values," she declared. "That ranch is bringing down the entire neighborhood." That's when I dropped the real bombshell. "I did some digging," I said, standing up with a folder in my hands. "Turns out, Karen filed a proposal 3 months ago for a premium equestrian facility that would require acquiring adjacent land." I paused for effect. "My land!" The room erupted. A board member grabbed the folder and read aloud. "Strategic land acquisition proposal for HOA recreational expansion, targeting the Williams property for forced sale or eminent domain seizure." "It's not theft," Karen shouted over the chaos. "It's community improvement. That land would be perfect for horse trails and riding lessons." "You tried to steal someone's ranch," someone yelled from the crowd. The vote to remove her was unanimous. She was also banned from holding any leadership position in the HOA for life. The criminal charges stuck. The DA filed multiple counts: criminal trespassing, filing false police reports, harassment, and attempted fraud. Karen hired a lawyer who tried to paint her as a well-meaning community volunteer who'd gotten in over her head. 6 months later, at sentencing, Judge Martinez wasn't buying it. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, looking down at her over his glasses, "you systematically harassed a legal property owner, wasted valuable police resources, and attempted to orchestrate what amounts to a fraudulent land grab. This wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. This was calculated." Karen got 18 months probation, 300 hours of community service, $25,000 in fines, and a permanent restraining order keeping her off my property. Her face was stone white as the judge continued. "Your actions represent everything wrong with unchecked authority and petty tyranny. You turned a homeowner association into your personal fiefdom and nearly destroyed an innocent man's peace." As the bailiff led her away, Karen looked back at me one last time. The anger was gone from her face, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion, as if she still couldn't understand how her perfect plan had gone so wrong. The Queen of Pine Ridge Estates had been dethroned, and justice had finally been served. 3 years later, I still live on my ranch. My horses graze peacefully, my rooster crows at dawn, and my century-old barn stands exactly where it's supposed to. The new HOA president sends me a Christmas card every year and apologizes for Karen's behavior. Sometimes I see Karen around town. She looks smaller now, deflated. She always looks away when she sees me. I hear she moved to a condo across town where there are no HOA rules to enforce and no neighbors to harass. As for me, I'm exactly where I want to be on my own land, with nobody telling me what color to paint my fence. If you enjoyed this story of HOA justice served, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Real stories of neighborhood drama and the people who thought they were above the law until they met someone who actually knew what the law was.